I used to rent a small apartment in an old, run-down building on the outskirts of town. The kind of place you take when you're desperate, broke, and willing to overlook the weird smell in the hallways. It was cheap, and that was all I cared about. The first time I noticed something was off, it was subtle. Just little things. The way the air always felt slightly too cold, even when the heater was on. How I'd sometimes hear faint tapping noises at night, like something shifting inside the walls. But it was an old building. Creaks and groans were expected. Then came the breathing. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it. A soft, shallow inhaling and exhaling. I immediately held my breath to make sure it wasn't mine. It wasn't. The sound was faint but distinct, coming from the large air vent near the ceiling. I sat up and stared at it, my heart pounding. Maybe it was just the way the air moved through the old ducts, I told myself. But something about it felt wrong. It wasn't the rhythmic hum of ventilation. It was slow, deliberate. I turned on the light and forced myself to check. Dragging a chair over, I climbed up and peered into the vent's darkness. Nothing. Just dust and rusted metal. I sighed, feeling ridiculous, and went to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been listening. A few nights later, I woke up suddenly. No reason, just that eerie, primal feeling that something had disturbed me. The room was silent, but a chill crawled over my skin. Then I heard it. A soft clink, like metal shifting against metal. I turned my head toward the vent, and that's when I saw them. Two eyes. Deep in the vent's darkness, just barely reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights outside, they stared at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The eyes didn't blink. They just watched, unblinking, unshifting, waiting. And then, slowly, too slowly, they vanished into the darkness. For the longest time, I lay frozen in my bed, my body screaming at me to run, to leave, to do something. But I didn't. I convinced myself it was a trick of the light, that I was dreaming. The next morning, I did what I should have done that night. I checked the vent. The cover, which had always been firmly screwed in place, was slightly ajar. Something had been there. Something had been watching me. I tried to tell my landlord, but he waved me off, muttering something about old buildings making noises. So, I did what any normal person would do. I stopped sleeping with the lights off, and I kept my chair pushed up against the vent, just in case. A week passed. No noises, no eyes, nothing. I started convincing myself that maybe I had imagined it. Maybe stress and lack of sleep were making me paranoid. Then one evening, as I was coming up the stairs, I noticed my neighbor's door was wide open. She was an older woman, quiet, never spoke much. But tonight, the inside of her apartment was dark. Too dark. The hallway light barely touched the shadows beyond the doorway. Something in my gut told me to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But then I heard it, a low, wet whisper. Help. I stepped closer, my heart hammering. He's in the walls, I ran. That night, I locked my door, shoved a chair under the handle, and stayed awake, sitting on my bed with my phone clutched tight in my hand. I needed to sleep, but I couldn't. Around 2 a.m., the scratching started again. Slow, deliberate, right inside the vent above me. Then, a quiet click. I stared in horror as the vent cover slowly, silently, slid open. A hand, thin, pale, and covered in grime, reached out, gripping the edge of the vent. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The light hit a face. A gaunt, hollow-eyed man, squeezed into the ductwork, staring at me with wide, hungry eyes. His mouth was slightly open, lips cracked, breath shallow. Then he smiled. I bolted out of my apartment and never went back. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a friend who still lived in the building. They found something in the vents. A sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, a rusted kitchen knife, and scratch marks everywhere. Whoever he was, he'd been there for a long time, watching, waiting, and I was never supposed to know.